I turned $150 into $1,250,000 because I learned these things. And no, it wasn't some magic trick or a viral business idea. It started with the kind of pressure most people quietly ignore. Bills stacking up, rent deadlines that sneak up faster than your paycheck, and that creeping feeling in your chest that maybe, just maybe, your normal life isn't actually safe. I want you to imagine that weight for a second. You know the one, money in your bank account feels temporary, the little comfort you built doesn't protect you, and every decision, even the small ones, carries this invisible cost. That's where I was. And it's the place almost nobody talks about. I didn't have some grand plan at first. I didn't know where to start or if I even could start. But there's this moment you reach when it hits you, ignoring it won't make it go away. That's when I began noticing the patterns I'd been missing, the traps most people fall into without realizing. I'll be honest, half the time, it felt impossible. The anxiety was real. The what if questions kept me awake. What if rent comes and there's nothing left? What if an emergency hits and I'm flat out? That's the invisible storm most people are sailing through without knowing it. And it's exactly what taught me the first lesson that changed everything. Before we dive in, here's a quick note: if hearing this helps you spot the cracks before they hit, consider subscribing. I'll break down the steps I took in a way that actually makes sense for someone living in the real world, not some fantasy scenario. And if you see something that hits close to home, hit that like button or drop a comment. It matters more than you think. Back then, I was living day to day. Money came in, money went out, almost without thought. Rent, groceries, random nights out, it all felt necessary, or at least harmless. I told myself everything was fine because, on the surface, it looked like it. My apartment was cozy, the routines were comfortable, and the world seemed predictable enough. But underneath, things were quietly slipping, bills stacked in ways I didn't notice, small decisions piled up into a bigger pattern, and I ignored the faint sense of unease because I convinced myself it wasn't urgent. Every time I spent on something unnecessary, I didn't see it as a choice that shaped my future. I was trapped in the illusion that comfort meant security. I remember catching myself mid-thought, realizing I was scrolling through another online store, telling myself, why not? It's just a little treat. And that was the pattern. Small impulses, one after another, that slowly widened a gap I didn't even realize existed. Half a year passed like that. I thought I understood money, but in reality, I had no framework. No plan, no buffer, no sense of what it truly meant to protect yourself from the unexpected. And looking back, it's easy to see how every tiny, innocent choice stacked against me, creating a situation that would hit me hard later. That's the quiet part of being unprepared. There's no loud crash at first, just a slow drift toward something you can't ignore. And by the time the world forced my hand, I had no idea what I'd stepped into. This is where things started to get real. Then it hit me. The comfortable apartment, the routines, the small pleasures, they vanished faster than I could catch them. I was moving into a new place, barely scraping together the deposit, and suddenly every decision mattered more than ever. The paycheck I thought was enough stretched thin in ways I hadn't anticipated. Rent, utilities, groceries, they weren't problems before, but now they felt like obstacles on a tightrope. I remember the first night in that apartment. Boxes stacked in every corner, the floor echoing with emptiness, and a quiet panic settling in my chest. Half the time I didn't even know where my money went. I had no system, no plan, just instinct and old habits that led me nowhere. The comfort I once relied on had evaporated, leaving me exposed, and the illusion that life was fine was gone. Every small purchase I made seemed to multiply in consequence. Even a coffee, a snack, or a casual order online became a question mark in my mind. I started thinking, what if this was all I have until payday? That thought alone could twist a stomach tighter than any debt collector's call. And the scary part, I didn't know if I'd even make it through the month. There's something unnerving about realizing the gap between what you assumed and what's real. I was there, walking the line, feeling the tension of each decision like a rope under my feet, knowing one misstep could cascade into failure. It's not dramatic in a flashy way, it's quiet, it's daily, it gnaws at you until you start questioning every choice. And that's the moment I understood, I wasn't just short on money. I was short on thinking. I had to find a new way, or I'd keep falling into the same trap, over and over. But at that time, I had no idea what that way looked like. I only knew I couldn't stay like this, and that realization alone felt heavy, but necessary. I started noticing patterns in how I handled money. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, just small moments where things didn't add up, choices I made without thinking, habits I hadn't even realized I had. Sitting there, I felt a subtle shift, a faint sense that maybe I could start moving in a better direction. It wasn't clear yet what that direction looked like. I had no plan, no big strategy, just a quiet understanding that the way I'd been living wasn't sustainable. I began asking myself simple questions. Why am I buying this? Does this choice actually help me, or am I just filling time? They weren't solutions yet, they were observations, but they were the first step toward something different. There was a strange tension in realizing that just noticing things was already part of change. I didn't need to act immediately, I just needed to see clearly, to understand the patterns I'd been blind to. And in that quiet observation, something started to shift. I began feeling a little more in control, a little more aware of how each choice could matter. It wasn't a breakthrough or a sudden revelation. It was slow, quiet. A growing sense that I could act differently, think differently, and gradually prepare for a future where I wasn't entirely at the mercy of circumstances. And that awareness, small as it was, felt like the first real step out of the uncertainty I'd been living in. I started noticing that I could take small steps that actually gave me a sense of control. Not big, not magical, just simple actions that begin to work for you. I realized that even the habit of approaching money consciously already gives you a sense of confidence I hadn't felt before. The first thing I did was simple and almost symbolic. I decided to set aside 5% of my paycheck. A small amount, but it was already a step in the right direction. And even then, the anxiety didn't completely disappear. I still found myself thinking, what if I suddenly need this money? What if this doesn't matter at all? But I felt that just taking action created a small freedom I hadn't experienced before. Then I noticed something else. If you approach spending with a little bit of thought, things start to make sense. For example, I needed a new fridge. Before, I would have just bought the first one I saw and moved on. But this time I thought, what if I need to sell it later? How easy would that be? Could it hold its value? Suddenly, it wasn't just a purchase, it was my first small investment, even in something I use every day. That's how I started looking at every dollar spent or saved as a choice that works for me instead of against me. Small steps, conscious decisions, simple questions of why and how, and gradually, I started feeling like I was taking control. It was no longer fear, but a quiet confidence. I could move forward, and every step mattered. And that small impulse, the fridge, the 5% savings, became the foothold from which real progress began. After that first experience with the fridge, I realized this was just the beginning. I started looking at everything I bought or planned to buy as an opportunity to invest wisely. Small things became practice. If a fridge could hold its value or be sold if needed, why not apply the same logic to other everyday items? Gradually, I began to scale up. At first, it was small household purchases, appliances, furniture, even occasional items that were easy to resell if necessary. I would ask myself, if I needed the money, how simple would it be to get it back? Is it worth the investment? This was no longer just saving, it was my first real lesson in managing assets. And with each step, my confidence grew. Small investments gave me a sense of control, and I started expanding further, a few stocks here, a little bit of securities there. I still made mistakes, but now they became lessons, not just losses. My savings pot started working for me on its own, even while I slept or went about daily life. The first returns from these actions allowed me to open a small business, a tiny food stand. At first, just an experiment, but it gave me a chance to apply all the principles in practice, every decision, every expense, every investment, everything under control. This is how my approach gradually grew from the fridge experiment to real assets and sources of passive income. And that process, moving from a small experiment to managing real resources, was the moment I felt I could truly scale my actions, instead of just living paycheck to paycheck. Over time, I started noticing that my actions were producing real results. My small investments in stocks and other assets began to do more than just move numbers. They taught me how the market worked and gave me a sense that I could influence outcomes. I analyzed, tracked patterns, and learned from mistakes. Each setback became a lesson rather than a reason to panic. At the same time, my savings pot started working for me on its own. The money I set aside and invested gradually began generating income without my constant involvement. It gave me a sense of independence and control. I could now see that I was shaping the outcome rather than just reacting to circumstances. Part of that income went into a small business, a food stand. At first, it was just an experiment, a tiny setup with a modest menu, but it became a real field for applying what I'd learned. Every decision was deliberate, evaluating liquidity, value, and risk. Gradually, the stand began generating stable income and allowed me to scale up. With every step, my confidence grew. I could see that a systematic approach works. Planning, analysis, small investments, and gradual scaling produce tangible results. It was the first time I felt like I could manage my future instead of merely watching it unfold. Finally, I felt real momentum. The small decisions compounded, creating measurable effects, and I could see my system working independently. That was the moment when chaos turned into a manageable process, and I began truly feeling what it meant to be in control of my resources. Looking back, I can see the whole journey, from $150, from the anxiety and chaos, through small steps and experiments, to the point where my actions started producing real results. The fears that once felt unbearable became part of the process, not a constant weight. Honestly, at the start, I thought there was no way out. Money slipped through my hands, habits drained my safety net, and uncertainty pressed harder than anything else. What helped me escape wasn't luck or a single brilliant idea. It was a system, small steps, deliberate decisions, practical experiments, and scaling. From the fridge to investments, from the tiny food stand to the first sources of passive income, every step built control and understanding. Now, chaos turned into structure, fear into confidence, habits into a system that works for me. It wasn't instant, but the results showed that moving forward intentionally is real. And that's why watching this isn't wasted time. You can see how even small, thoughtful actions compound into progress. If any of this resonates, hit like. If it sparks something for you personally, subscribe to catch the next breakdown of how small actions become real change. And leave a comment if something felt useful. I want to know that these lessons reach you. Thank you for watching. Let this sense of control and small victories stay with you, the way it has stayed with me.